There we go. Recording. Thank you for joining. Welcome, everybody. SIG API Machinery bi-weekly meeting. Today is April 20, 2022. A lot of twos on the number. We have a couple of very interesting topics today, and I think we should get into them to use the time appropriately. So the first one is for Wojtek. Thank you for joining, Wojtek. I will leave it with you.
Okay, so what I wanted to discuss is the proposal that or the cap change or update to the cap, a long-living one for the API list pagination. I would like to finally graduate it to GA. I mean, the original cap isn't coming from me, but it's coming from Clayton from 1.8 or 1.7 or something like that. So it's like 5 years old or so. And we still didn't graduate it to GA. So I think it's high time to actually do that. One of the things that is, or probably the only really controversial thing is that I believe that one of the things that we should do for GA is to add the pagination support also to the watchcache, and this is the core of the proposal, or the core of the change in the proposal. And I think I'm not sure. Do you want me to briefly go over what I'm proposing, or like I think that most of people here read it because there were a bunch of comments. So
I think it's worth giving at least a recap of the delta from where we are, which I could imagine GAing as is because it's been there for years, versus where you're looking to take it.
Okay, so where we are currently is basically we have a support for pagination when listing from etcd. We don't have any support for pagination when listing from watchcache. So we have this strange semantic, or in my opinion at least, strange semantic where if you pass resource version equal to 0, then the limit parameter is actually ignored and watchcache is returning like all the items requested by the list. If you don't specify resource version, I mean, it's empty string, it's basically always is redirected to etcd. So we are just honoring the limit parameter and do the pagination. If you set the resource version to some actual number not equal to 0, then if the limit is set, we send the request to etcd and use pagination. If the request is if the limit is not set, then we serve it from cache. So this is roughly where we are. What I'm proposing is basically to start honoring the limit even when the list is happening from cache, which is fairly like pretty helpful for the performance reasons, and you will unify the semantic of the list. So we will be always honoring the limit parameter. And in terms of implementation, I think that the biggest concern is that it's potentially complex change. In terms of implementation, what I'm proposing is to basically switch the data structure in which we are storing the current state from the current like more or less hash map to a B tree that is actually the same, like reuse the same B tree that etcd is using underneath. So hopefully from etcd we get a lot of like, so we have a lot of soak time. So hopefully it is fairly reliable structure, and build the and basically wrap this B tree into the interface that watchcache is currently using to yes, wrap the B tree to implement the same interface that watchcache is currently using, and simply replace the existing cache with the B tree based cache. That's the high level. There are like a couple like smaller changes that needs to happen there, but I think we can start from here.
Yeah, I think that's good enough to have a discussion. I was going to say some other stuff, but before I before I dive in that, actually, David raised a good point, which is, what's wrong with just GAing the way it is? I mean, sure, the semantic is inconsistent, but is that really that bad?
I think it is misleading. I think it would be useful also to support the problems that we have is that we can't basically redirect many of the existing, or there are many requests that we can't redirect to etcd, in particular, like listing pods that kubelets are doing when on start, because
you mean can't from a performance standpoint, not from a
performance
perspective.
Yeah.
So what if we said we want to GA this as is, but before we do, we want to have a GA level for 3 releases of the initial lists from resource version 0 are handled by using a watch instead. And we get all of our known and well-behaved clients fixed. And then we say, okay, now when you set limit, it's going to behave consistently, and we will just always send it to etcd. And if you crush your etcd, well, that's probably because you aren't using the recommended way to list watch. Don't do that.
So I was actually going to say, before we go into specifics like that, like, we could have 2 different discussions here. One is how to, it sounds like there's 2 different discussions. One is how to make this GA to tie up loose ends, and the other is I think if you read the subtext here, you're saying that we need to do this watch cache thing for performance reasons, which is not really a GA or not reason, is performance, and this is just a convenient time at which to do it. Does that sound like what you're saying, Wojtek, or did I mischaracterize you?
No, I think it's fair summary.
Okay, all right, then yeah. So why not the thing that David said?
Yeah, so I think I was thinking about it, and I'm still seeing a bunch of especially third-party components that are using like client Go from like 1.7 or 1.9 or whatever, 1.11. And it's hard to convince all those people, and we don't have like a good leverage to convince them to actually migrate to newer versions. And with that, like, any changes that we do currently will take years to propagate to all those components. And from operators' perspective, I'm a little bit afraid that this will hurt us.
I mean, we've got some tools, right? Like we could tweak API priority and fairness to like serialize all non-ideal list requests or something, right? Like it would make those clients slow, and that would give people an incentive to update them.
Yes and no. I mean, we can prevent them from overloading API server. I 100% agree with that one. But we will potentially break that functionality that those components provide. And like in some cases where cluster admins actually own also those components, they will probably be able to fix that. But in some cases, those are like some third-party components that they just use, and all they can do is ask those third-party providers to change that, which is sometimes happening.
I understand. At the same time, like, of all the strategies I've seen to like get people to upgrade things, like just making it slower is like the least disruptive, and like the disruptiveness to like probability that you'll actually go upgrade it ratio seems pretty good with that one.
Yes, on the other hand, like the biggest escalations that I've seen from customers are also coming from, why did you break my scalability? Something worked and I didn't work.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has both ends. Yes.
Okay, so here's the thought I have about this, and it's actually not just in relation to this proposal, but some other discussions that have happened in a few different places. I feel like API server has a kind of a choice to make. Like historically, we have decided, or we have at least pretended, that we're not a database and we're not offering particular features of a database, such as indexing, fast queries, complex queries, transactions, right? We're not, API server is not in the business of doing those things. So that, and I'll call that the status quo option. That's kind of historically what we've done. In contrast, I see two potential roads that we could go down. So the second option is the road where we admit that we're a database and we start implementing some databasey features. And I would consider this B-tree and MVCC thing a databasey feature. So I think I see that as moving us down that road. Other similar features again are like implementing selection over particular fields on CRDs, right? If we made that efficient, that's definitely a database type feature. So I see that as like option 2 is like, okay, I guess we're a database and we better act like it and implement all this stuff. And then I see option 3 as like, okay, the contract users want is a database, but our business value is not adding database features. That's not necessarily the thing that we're good at. Or maybe we are, I don't know, we haven't really tried that much. But to implement the user requests for these database type features, maybe it's time to get a real database or somehow, right? And that would be super disruptive. It would involve like our storage format would have to change, right? You can't store opaque double proto blobs in a database and expect the database search features to work, right? So that would be super disruptive, but it would maybe be the more correct way of getting database type features that users want. So I see like we've got, maybe there's more options, but those are the obvious 3 that I see. And I think we've got like a strategic choice to make. I wouldn't want to accidentally start building a database any more than we already have without like consciously deciding that, yeah, that's the route that we want to go down. All right, that's
yeah, I think,
I'm not sure we need to. Go ahead, Wojtek.
Yeah, how about Wojtek and then Mike?
Yeah, I think I understand the concern. I think the reason why I don't fully agree that it's now the decision point is that like we already added support for pagination, like it's already in the API. So it's a matter if we implement it like consistently or we implement it in the currently partial way. So I think it's true. It would be true if we would be adding like pagination now, and then the question like the extending the API to support pagination. But I think given that we already added it, it's only a matter of like
partly, right? Like the pagination that we added currently passes through to etcd, so that's sort of in category 3, right? We're using the database as it's intended. I think Mike, and then
yeah, I think I wanted to agree with Wojtek. I mean, if you just stop and think about the API we have, forget about the implementation, think about the API, right? We've already told clients they can paginate, right? We've already told clients they can do field selectors. So I'm not sure. I don't see it as signing up for a bunch of new features. I see it as finishing implementation of the features we've already got.
One option for finishing that implementation is to say we have the current state that we have and we consider that finished. Or we could say we have the state that we have and we have given you a way now to be efficient, and we are going to make your limit request always honored. The side effect of that is that it can be slow. And I see that as completing the feature we started.
Almog, hopefully I didn't mispronounce your name too badly.
Yeah, so maybe that's repeating what you guys said before, but I think like you can see that as option 4, which is not revisiting and not building a database, but just enhancing what we have. It's not like building new features, but more like improving the implementation.
So I would say, I would say, yeah, I get where y'all are coming from, but I would say that the databasey features that we have are incomplete at best, right? Like field selectors are hand curated and extremely unperformant. Pagination works only in particular scenarios, which is the complaint here. There's no transaction support at all, right? Like our queries in general, even of label selectors, are extremely inefficient, except for a couple that we hand optimized, right? So the question isn't like yeah, we gave people some half-baked semantics. So the question is, do we want to like turn those fully baked, or live with it the way that we left it? That's the question I see it. Steve has a hand up.
I think I would ask like what, when we're considering quote finishing out things like label selectors or field selectors or whatnot, from David's framework, like if you're not delegating that to a database that has that done, and you're implementing B trees in the API server, like how is that not building the database, right? Like fundamentally,
yeah, I'm not proposing that we build the B trees. I'm proposing that we explicitly don't, and say we have the features we have the scale that we have. If you are looking for something different or something more, you're looking for a system on top. You're not looking for something that we provided here.
Yeah, and I think that was option 1, right? So I think 1 and 3 make a lot of sense, kind of as a framework, and then the 2, which is maybe where this KEP is, seems a bit harder to justify.
I mean, we already have aspects of 2, right? We've already got watch caches and stuff. Wojtek?
Yeah. So I think I wanted to better understand like the concerns that you have. So do I understand correctly that you are mostly afraid about introducing additional complexity due to this feature, or is it something else?
Complexity is definitely a large part of the concern, and like not just the like complexity of getting it working at all, but also the ongoing maintenance. So yeah, I don't know if that's completely I don't know if that's completely the concern, but that is definitely a part of it. Yeah.
That is my primary concern. I am primarily concerned about the number of people available who could effectively debug problems in this area in an ongoing way.
Yeah, and I feel like adding I feel like adding a B tree and MVCC is definitely like a like maybe it's arguable that we're not a database before that, but if you add something like that in, it's time to stop pretending. Wojtek, did you lose a connection there?
No, so I'm wondering if there is something that we can address or I can address to the concern of like complexity, like would better testing or like anything like that, like better extraction of things would help here, or it doesn't address anything in your opinion?
I don't think that I can say that additional testing is going to make it easier for us to find people to pick up maintenance in an ongoing way. And I think I would point as evidence to the issues that we have currently in etcd, which is based on similar technology, right? And etcd is suffering from a lack of people either willing or able or both to maintain it.
I mean, you can also argue that there's not that many people that can maintain the existing watch cache.
What about, memory consumption? It seems like this solution will actually consume more memory. And I think API server, like in general, like the watch cache, right? Already consumes a lot.
Yeah, that's a tactical, concern. And I noticed that reading this morning. I'm not sure how you're going to fit this in any sort of RAM budget.
No, I think
so. I think usually databases, they usually like maintain a sparse index, then like a buffer, memory buffer that is capped at certain like 1 gigabyte or something like that, and then you bring data from disk to the buffer and then index, right? So this is how they, I think, I mean, at least some databases, this is how they constrain memory consumption. In this case, I think you can go very high. There's no limit essentially, which is dangerous.
No, so I think I didn't have time to respond to that since I saw this comment, but I think it's doable to make it work within the existing limit. Like it won't decrease the existing memory usage, but it won't visibly increase it. I'm completely fine with saying that like it's a requirement that we can't increase that.
Can you help me understand why you think it won't increase the memory usage?
So I think your main argument was, if I read correctly, that like we will increase it because we will need to store more history.
Not that we'll store more history, but well, yeah, that we will store more history for specific objects, especially if a single object changes a lot.
Yeah, we are storing the objects themselves anyway, because we are storing the transaction logs, anything. So it's not that we will be storing more objects. It's only the metadata, more or less.
Well, we store 75 seconds, and you propose to raise that to 2.5 minutes, which is definitely going to be.
So that one we can probably fix and say we are still going to store like 75 seconds, and if we are if we exceeded that and like the request is basically older than that, we just forward it to etcd. It's fairly rare that like we are like doing continuations from that. Also, we can probably like afford redirecting those to etcd.
I mean, while we're talking about like tactical alternatives, I think, should we consider some other thing? Like it occurs to me that a lot of times people just want to list the names of objects. Like they don't want the contents of all the objects, right? If we implemented a list API that just listed names, could we maybe return all the names in one response and not need to rely on pagination so heavily?
Is it really the case that like names are enough? I think
that's that's kind of the question, right? Like how much analysis did we do to determine that the only way to get a win here is to make pagination universal?
Yeah, so I should probably have added. I think all the cases that I'm aware, like which is like number of different components from different areas, like they neither of those need like full objects, but pretty much all of them need more than even object metadata.
Yeah.
So one of the things we find in databases is you can do a read with a projection, right? Say return this fragment or these pieces of the object. I don't know, wojtekt, in cases you're talking about is something like Could something like that
Yeah,
be?
that probably would help if our primary problem was like network bandwidth between API server and clients, which actually in some cases it is. And I think in many other cases it's just CPU like going through all the objects, right? Because API server has to perform that projection.
Well, but CPU deserialization is actually, I still think, if not the overwhelming majority of the time, it's still a big chunk of the time, right? We optimized out almost all the other components, but like serialization, deserialization, and reserialization are still fundamentally expensive. And the problem is there's a lot of overhead in that approach, and it's diminishing returns the more CRDs exist in the system, right? Like that's another problem is like, are we optimizing for people having more and more pods and nodes? Like, is that the only thing that we're optimizing for in Cube? Because that's a thing. It's not the only thing.
It would be a very different feature to come in and say, I think the most useful thing we could do is to create a binary format for custom resources. And maybe it is, or maybe it isn't, but
I mean, even I only bring that up just because like avoiding deserialization, avoiding serialization, there's a lot of things there. What is the thing you're optimizing for as a project? Is it partial lists of pods on nodes?
I mean that goes back to the, I don't know if you were here to hear my trilemma, Clayton, but that kind of goes.
For not being here for that.
That's okay. It goes back to the choice of like, status quo, which is like don't implement any more database features, or admit that we're a database and go ahead and implement database features ourselves, or admit that we're a database but we want to outsource all the features to an external database, right?
And by the way, Steve, are you on the agenda yet for telling us about that?
Well, but before we even get into that, but like there's another one, which is kick the can down the road, because this is the most important. Like, how important is this characteristic of scale versus maybe it's not the right time to tackle this. Maybe that's like the
sure, we could delay it, which is equivalent to the status quo for now.
Delay it deliberately while we invest in a better assessment. Like one of the things I struggle with is the use cases in the ecosystem are diverging, but I'm not sure that the high scale people really still care about anything other than base pod or node performance. It's really two different audiences.
Okay, I'm going to raise my hand here. Yeah, I'm right now working on something that has a lot of stuff that's not pods. There are things defined by CRDs.
Yeah, I think I actually agree with Mike that we need to consider non-built-in resources.
Yeah, but I wanted to say that it's somewhat orthogonal to this cap, right? Because it doesn't say anything about it's not specific to built-in resources. It works the same way for CRDs.
Yeah, but do we even have the watch cache on for CRDs?
We do.
Oh, we do.
By
okay.
default. I mean,
okay.
I mean, I'm not sure like how many people are disabling that, which is like hardly possible, but we do have it by default.
Okay. Yeah, I do think.
In fact, the only way to turn it off for things defined by CRDs is to turn it off. Period.
I'm not sure about that, but I think,
tried. That's what I found.
Okay, then you're probably right if you tried. Maybe that's a bug though.
Yeah, maybe it is. You guys tell me.
I do think like improving CRD scale is something that maybe also fits into this trilemma, right?
Yeah, and again, like I don't know that we fully like hit all of the performance aspects of like deserialization. I'm not saying that, and in fact, I'm not trying to imply wojtekt that like this isn't the right thing to spend our resources on. I'm just there's a lot of things like we've got the protobuf undigestible lump sitting in our stomachs of protobuf 2 and go protobuf. I'd like to. I think there's some wins there. They may not be obvious wins, but like it is another type of problem that's not performance that has to be addressed, and it does hit on some of the other aspects, serialization and CRDB and CRDs.
But this, I mean, yeah, this gets back to like, should we decide that actually we want to have a real database, right? we would change our storage format significantly, and that would render a lot of optimization there kind of moot.
Well, wait,
Right.
wait. There now, I think you're leaping.
I mean, just imagine that we decided, like, I don't know, Postgres is going to be our database now. This is just an example. Would we store opaque proto blobs in Postgres? No, we would split things out by, we would define schemas. Because you can't, it's hard to search opaque proto blobs, right? If it was just one layer of proto blob, then maybe we could do that, but we don't have that. We've got an envelope with a proto blob inside it as raw bytes, right?
That's another example, Daniel, though, of there are JSON indices in the world that are just as effective at some of that. Yeah, and like these trade-offs, and I think that's the
Sure,
point you're
but
making is a total valid one, which
if
is
we're switching to like Mongo, which uses BSON, which is basically JSON but binary, like even that we wouldn't be able to search because we have this double encoded proto thing, right? Like we would have to adjust the storage format to make it work with Mongo's indexing.
And that's maybe what I was referring to with like Google Protobuf, right? Like we are going to have to make a serialization change potentially to unlock there. We're going to take a performance hit at the same time we do it. And that's going to revert the high scale pod node use case, I would suspect, although, you know, it's possible it doesn't. CRDs benefit nothing from optimizations we make in that space. So like, I guess it's a question of how much are we willing to invest to get the real improvement?
Well, yeah, I think it also, like, it's not just how much are we investing, but what are we investing towards, right? If we're going to switch storage engines, then that's a very different storage optimization than assuming we're not going to switch storage engines, then we just want to make deserialization faster.
Yeah, and storage engines is probably is a significant amount of time to get to a point where any of us would be confident about doing anything other than basic first steps towards an exploration. So that's basically kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, but even when we're kicking the can down the road, I think it's good to have some idea of which road we're kicking it down, right? Like otherwise, there's not that many of us to go around, and I don't want us to be wasting effort and going down the wrong, or going down a road where we're ultimately going to change our mind. Okay, let's try and somehow wrap this discussion up a little bit. Almog?
Just a quick question. Do we have some place that we documented the use cases for these considerations?
For pagination?
Not for pagination, but if we're talking about the possibility that we're admitting that we should behave like a database, all right? At least for me, that sounds a little bit like maybe it's an overkill. And if that's the use case, what are our use cases for that, right? Because if not, then it's pretty easy to answer that.
So
old issues, for instance, asking people, hey, I'd like to create a user provided an index on my CRDs, like that sort of thing.
Yeah, field queries, or sorry, field selectors, label selectors, those to do efficiently require an index to be built. And cleverly using the etcd transactions, for instance, could give you a look-aside index.
And
I will
additionally, other people
from years ago, so I don't know if we wrote it down.
Yeah,
but that's
it's probably worth writing something down,
right? If you're doing like in a small capacity field search, that's not really hard enough for us to implement all of this kind of overhead inside of the API. Right, but
no, field search is actually pretty hard.
Yeah, I'm going to take the other side. Once you build a version aware or serialization version aware field index plus a query planner, then you're like 90% of the way into code that the vast majority of developers are not going to be suited to maintain. And that probably includes myself, right?
So what I meant is, what is the use case that require you to do like field search? Maybe the use case doesn't require it to be very high efficient. That's what I meant.
So let me tell you one use case that I think is widely appreciated as it should be. So one of the things that we find ourselves wanting to do with Kube API Machinery is we have references between objects, and we want to keep the referenced let's see, the referenced object is around as long as the referencing object is using it. So for example, while a pod is using a PVC, we want to keep the PVC around. And similarly, while a PVC is latched or bound to a PV, we want to keep the PV around. Now, we do have transactions in the Kube API, but they're single object transactions. They're single reads and writes. And so you can't maintain referential integrity. That's what this is called in database land. You can't maintain referential integrity with single object transactions. Okay, so we just can't do it directly in the API machinery. But what we do is we have, no, we can't.
It is possible, but you have to do a bit of a dance.
Given
right?
absolute ordering, I believe you could fundamentally do this. I would not claim that it is.
Right. You put both
worth-
objects into a like I'm hooking them up state, and then you make them reference each other, and then you take them out of the I'm hooking them up state. Right.
Okay. So now you're kind of going where I'm going. Okay. So the point is the API machinery itself can't do it. What you're talking about is enlisting the services of a controller. And so, right, we have existing demonstrations of how to do it in the existing stuff that keeps a PVC around while a pod is used, and keeps a PV around while a PVC is using it. And so the key way of, and I wrote up a blog entry about, the abstract idea here, right? And the idea is that you have, you use a finalizer and you keep an object around while it's in use by another object. And you enlist the services of a controller to, remove that finalizer when it's okay to have the object deleted. And by careful ordering of the actions of the controller, that you can do. But in order to do this pattern, you basically have to query for things that are using a particular thing. Okay, so now we're getting into query by a field selector. So the existing code, I think, will actually do that filtering on the client side, and that's functionally correct. But it's more efficient if you can do it on the server side.
Yeah, I think to take what Mike is saying and what David is saying and combine them, what we're saying is we don't want to write this hard code so that we don't know how to maintain. So we're going to make users do something similar to work around it. That's one way of interpreting this, which doesn't put us in a terribly good light.
Right. It does have a slight advantage in that, when you're implementing a database server, you have to implement the combination of all the features, whereas typically each client is not asking for the combination of all the features. So any given client has a simpler job.
Yeah. But just observing people try to do this dance correctly, like if you've got if you want to do a manipulation that requires multi-stage locking to do correctly, it's just really challenging for most people to do that.
I agree.
In ways that I wouldn't have appreciated before I saw people struggle.
I agree. And yeah. So, again, I just want to emphasize, I think, without, I'm not so much interested in, I kind of am. So I have a short list of features that I would like to add to the queries. But, mainly I think we're talking about, we started here talking about completing the existing features. But anyway, overall, I kind of sympathize with the idea of, why are we repeating the work of implementing a database when there's already other people that are implementing and maintaining databases? Maybe we should just sign up for storing in a more serious database. And, Steve tells me he's going to present something about that sometime soon.
All right. Yeah, Steve had an item here and I booted it to next time because I thought that this item would take a while. And on that note, I think we should move on to the last topic. And unfortunately, Jordan chatted at me and said that he's stuck and can't join us. So hopefully we can figure out what he wanted to tell us from these context links.
So can I make one other remark that, it's kind of bugging me about this previous discussion about people, not having people available to maintain stuff.
Sure.
This is something that as it was marked, came up in etcd. It comes up again and again, right? I mean, we've had cases of like absolutely foundational stuff, right? Like the log4j bug, right? There's absolutely foundational stuff which is just pitifully under-maintained. It seems to me we've got an industry problem here, right? We've got everybody trying to free ride off of almost nothing. That there's a big industry structure problem here that needs a more fundamental, aggressive solution than us not trying to finish implementing our features.
I agree it's an industry-wide problem, but I don't know how we can solve it, and I don't know if it's prudent to ignore it.
Yeah,
that's my
I'll
point.
go with, I'm interested in finding a way to solve the needs for my little spot. I'd be very happy with something generic, but I don't know that I see a practical way for me to influence log4j, for instance.
Right, of course, we're not going to solve it even for ourselves now. This is a problem that's bigger than us. All we can do is, kick it upstream or up to high level people, right? Just add our voices to the people saying, there's an industry problem here, right? Tell our execs, there's an industry problem here.
I'm hoping for something maybe a little bit more concrete and lower level for etcd in particular. But I am sensitive to not, I am aware enough that I don't want to dig that stack deeper. I have one basket I need to watch. I don't want to make a second one.
I think we, look, big problems aren't going to get solved quickly. Obviously, we have to take, tactical steps and do what we can, coping with the industry as it is today. But I think we, should also, add our voices to saying, there is a big problem. It needs a bigger, different way of being solved.
I don't know concretely how to do that.
I mean, the easy answer is find the use cases in Kubernetes that have people who need to go solve those problems and find a way that sustainably overlaps that investment. That's the only way that open source works. That is how open source works. We find problems that need to be solved, and then we align the investment in that new thing, and we get the win on fixing the things that we come out. Like, that's the only way that anything ever gets done anywhere, especially in open source. And we can do it. That's partially why I was asking about watchcache performance. Like, is this a scale problem? That's why Steve is working on the database stuff, because like we think there's use cases around Kube and CRDs that can be improved. I know there's people who are looking for it. I'm trying to find the reasons that we need to improve some of these specific things. As Dan, you were saying, like, why are we doing this? What is the use case broader than just get to?
Yeah, I think, I'm worried that we didn't give Wojtek any guidance whatsoever, any concrete guidance about this cap. I do think we should take a minute and talk about the etcd client stuff that Jordan has put here. From what he told me in over chat, there are, let's see.
I actually am here. I'm on mobile, so I'm not sure my signal, but yeah, I'm waiting for a tow truck, so who knows what this will be like. But just to summarize briefly, the context is in the thread about etcd. I linked to a particular pull request updating the etcd client where there were some questions about like test coverage, and there's at least one area where it doesn't seem like there's sufficient coverage upstream, and there's no coverage I'm aware of in our tests. And so, like, in terms of like concrete impact, it means when there's a update to an etcd client library, like as a reviewer, I don't know if it's safe or not. If it's not well tested upstream and we don't have tests, I don't know if it's safe to accept. And so I just wanted to raise that particular area and see, like, do we want to try to help add test coverage upstream or get coverage in our Kubernetes suites? And what do we do in the meantime until that coverage is there?
Yeah, I think to go back to the trilemma that I'm positing, if we're not going to switch databases, then we had better make sure that etcd is functioning the way we think it is functioning. And anyone who's been following probably knows that etcd has had some bugs, and it was suggested that you not use the first couple versions of 3.5, which is concerning. So this is, yeah, I don't know if anyone else has ideas about things we can do to help the situation. But yeah, I'm concerned in general, and this is, I mean, it's both an argument for finding a real database that etcd is having issues at the moment, and it's also an argument against attempting to implement our own database, because why are we going to do better? So that's my current take on. To be clear, like if you'd asked me like a month ago what I thought of rolling over to a different database, I would have been like 100% against it. And today I'm only like 80% against it.
I'm definitely in the why do I think we do better camp.
Yeah. Steve.
Jordan, if you're still here, I was hoping that you could expand on what kind of testing we could add, and like, does appropriate testing here look like going upstream and filling in the gap as reviewers for etcd, or something cube side? Like, what do you expect?
Yeah, so the particular gaps that I was noticing were around things like failover scenarios and multi-server scenarios and TLS handling. So those are the three areas I know have been problematic in the past, and I'm just trying to chase issues and test stuff upstream in etcd. It seems like there's been some efforts made to close those gaps, but there are still gaps like the one I linked to. It's not clear to me that the tests that are there actually match what production environments are encountering. And so that, like, trying to highlight the gap, and then it seems like closing the gap upstream is the right place to do it. But I don't know enough about their test infrastructure to know how reasonable that is. Yeah, so
I would personally not expect to have etcd gaps tested in like API Machinery or Kubernetes repos. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
I could certainly see having it in both. We have tests that make sure Cube works, for instance.
I wouldn't want, like other people have these problems and or potentially could have these problems, not just us. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Like, I mean, it is worrying that we don't have failover tests. So like, certainly when OpenShift was doing like our rolling upgrade tests and all that, like we built in things to make sure that etcd stayed available, and we definitely hit client hangover bugs, and Sam put some things upstream, but we didn't quite get all the way because we don't run a ton of HA etcd rollover upgrade scenarios that expect rolling updates of etcd. Like, we're not hitting that scenario. So I would lean a lot of the failover connectivity stuff to be upstream, because it's going to have fewer dependencies. But it also points that, like, should we be thinking about spending a little bit more time on rolling up data of Kube API server and etcd upstream?
I think it would be totally reasonable to test that failover from API server's perspective works, but testing it to verify, if we think that most of the problems are in the etcd client, like I think we should test that in the etcd repo.
One nuance of that is that the failover behaviors, like a lot of the weird edge cases, tend to live at the intersection of the etcd logic and the gRPC libraries, and the versions of the gRPC libraries that etcd is testing with may or may not be the versions that we are building into the Kube API server. Like, we might have picked up a newer version of gRPC than they tested with.
David definitely hit some of those like early, like we had a lot of gRPC hangs. I haven't seen those in a year or two. I don't know, David, if you've seen them recently, but I would worry about version skew there, because a regression could creep in and it would hit us at scale almost immediately, like us, the community.
So there are mechanisms
if the
for running dependency tests with a given version snapshot. So if the test lived in etcd and could be invoked as like normal Go tests, we can run those with the versions that we have. But the more esoteric or involved the setup is, like if they're integration tests or E2E tests on the etcd side, we don't have good ways to like run their CI, complex CI stuff with our gRPC versions.
Right. We could like do that in a fork of etcd, like fork etcd, put in the gRPC version we're going to use, run the tests, right? Like something like that.
Right, but that starts to look more like us testing etcd behavior on our
I mean,
side with our specific config, which
if we're swapping out dependencies is reasonable, right?
Right, but like at a first glance, your reaction that like it seems like these tests belong in etcd, which I agree with, it gets a little more complex when we also need the behavior to be tested with the particular dependency versions we're building with.
Right. And as an example, what we do is we can say, okay, I'm going to vendor Cube for, regardless of whether you're supposed to or not, we're going to vendor Cube. Cube has tests associated with it. We're going to pull those testing libraries and run that test inside of whatever it is we vendored it into. You could do something similar to that in with etcd, where you have a test, sure, they run it, but it's structured in a way that you can actually essentially vendor that test and run it locally for yourself.
I mean, just from an etcd perspective, it makes sense to me that we would be doing, especially with gRPC, we would be doing more aggressive testing against recent versions of it, and maybe doing against multiple versions of it, because, well, I mean, just the way that GoMod works, you're going to have anybody using the client potentially picking up not exactly the version that you tested with if you only pick one version. So I'd be, I think I'm in favor of upstream.
We are running out of time here. What should we tell Wojtek about this cap?
I would really like, well, I guess I also listed it in the cap itself. I would really like to see us make most clients stop using the case that doesn't work right, which I believe is resource version 0 with a limit set, and then increase the cost, degrade the performance of clients who are making that request and say you should update to this new thing, and then eventually make it just point directly to etcd. And so we gain unification that way. All limit requests are treated the same, and they don't
note that resource version 0 is wrong for components that are restarting, because it can time travel back in time. So we already have that thing that we still haven't fixed that bug. So there's at least a part of me that's like, I don't want people using resource version 0 unless they absolutely have to anyway.
So
yeah, and
go ahead, Wojtek.
there's also a question, a reason that like the counter argument is that like we will be building this support for, I mean, the API for like streaming the lists will be there, but like a bunch of that will be built into our client library, which is fine for components that are written in Go, but like there are also other components written in other languages that will not be able to directly benefit from that, and they won't migrate to it easily.
So my first idea about what we should do is separate the GA discussion from the optimization discussion, and take all the commits to this cap except for the last one, and merge those and call the feature GA, and then talk about this optimization separately. Because you've got 3 commits here, and the first 2 are obviously great. And all the stuff that we need to discuss is in the last one. So, but that'd be my impression for how to make progress. I don't know. Does that
I
sound
could
reasonable?
accept that, but I'm less sure about the testing coverage that we get if our reflectors don't use pagination today. Right? How many clients do we have in our test suite today that provide good coverage of pagination? So I think there may be work needed to do that and to do things like preserve the behavior used by the storage version migrator, which I
Okay.
think I saw listed as a goal, right? So I think there's still work to do even to declare GA.
Okay, that sounds totally reasonable, and also I would say is a good reason to separate the discussion. I think we probably have to come back and discuss the rest of it next time or another time.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to discuss further, like the splitting the discussion. I think it. I'm not sure I fully agree that we should GA without it, but I agree that there are like the things that David just mentioned make sense to me, like universally independently of what we do with
Yeah, I mean, we haven't changed it in like what 10, 15 releases or something like that. So
yeah.
I'm not saying that what I'm saying is when I looked at it, I don't think the test coverage was there to give me confidence that it remains consistent for the future.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we have to stop now.
Well, thank you for the discussion, and looks like we will have room for continue this discussion either on a next meeting or a separate meeting. Thank you everybody for joining, and hope you have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.